We bought the cheapest Aston Martin DB9 in the UK. Is it an incredible bargain or a massive disappointment? Let's find out.
Bit of trivia for you here. The Aston Martin DB9 was designed by Ian Callum. He also designed the Ford RS200 and the Escort Cosworth. It looks better in the flesh than in pictures, in my opinion. Being an Aston, it's expected to look good, and it really does. I think it's aged really well, and it will continue to do so into the future. It's a timeless classic, in my opinion.
The DB9 was £110,000 when it was new nearly 20 years ago. It's got a naturally aspirated 6-litre V12 pumping out 450 horsepower and 575 newton meters of torque, giving it a power to weight ratio of 257 horsepower per tonne, which is enough to have a bit of fun. The interior, as you would expect, is very nice indeed. The only thing that I've noticed everybody comments on is the wood's veneer on the dash in the centre. I actually quite like it myself, but almost everybody I've showed the car to immediately points it out and says it looks out of place in the car. And I know from researching online that Aston DB9 owners tend to prefer the piano black to the wood veneer. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The handling and brakes are quite interesting. I drove this car at Brands Hatch last week on the Grand Prix circuit, and I'd say the handling was just really nice. I drove a more modern M4 competition as well on the same day, and it had much edgier handling. This, by contrast, was super easy, combined with the linear throttle and the good feeling. You get a really good feeling from the brakes as well. It was really easy to drive in the wet. And my only criticism of the brakes is when you are at slow speed, they just feel very under-servoed. So for example, if you're pulling out of your driveway or out of a car park and you've got your foot on the brake, like you would in a normal automatic car to stop it from going forwards, you then start the engine and the car actually moves forwards because you're not pressing the brake hard enough. So it's a mild annoyance and irritation at first when you're not used to the car, but of course when you get used to it, you just press the brake harder. It feels a bit like, if you've got any experience with driving race cars, it feels like a bit like having a pedal box on a race car. I don't quite know why Aston Martin would have designed it like that. It is nice on track, you get a lot of feel from the brakes, but personally I would prefer it if they had a little more servo power at low speeds. Other than that, the handling is just wonderful. I'm not a big fan of V12 cars in general because although they sound great, they've got loads of torque, loads of power, generally speaking the engines are just too heavy and it kind of destroys the handling. But with the DB9 there was none of that at all. You know, if I didn't know better I would have said it was a smaller V8 or V10 engine. So it works really well. Beautiful handling, beautiful rides. Much better ride than a Bentley GT, incidentally. Can't really say more than that. It's just a nice place to be, and it's a nice car to drive. The thing you immediately notice about the DB9 is that it doesn't actually feel that quick. And the reason for that is that it has an extremely linear throttle. A lot of modern cars have a throttle map so that when you're, for example, at 25% throttle, it's actually at more like 60%, for example. And this makes it feel faster than it actually is. So in that example, the last 40% of the throttle travel will only give you a tiny bit more power. Of course, being an Aston Martin, it doesn't need to show off or pretend that it's fast because it just is and everyone knows it. And I quite like that actually. It's not massively fast by modern standards, 4.9 seconds to 60 miles an hour and a top speed of 183. But I guess the key thing really is, what does that actually feel like from the driver's seat when you're able to hustle the car, say on a country lane? Why don't we find out? Let's give it some stick. There's a lot of comments on the internet that the gearbox in the DB9 is not actually that good. I have to say, my experience is the complete opposite. I really disagree with that. The gear changes are silky smooth, very quick, and there's very little delay for a Tiptronic gearbox, which is what this is, an auto gearbox with flappy paddles. Almost instant gear changes. So much better than, for example, the ML63 I drove a few weeks ago. Also, the feeling of actually pulling the paddles, it just feels like they're, you know, a really high quality feeling. There's a nice, they're really smooth. They make a nice kind of soft click when you pull them, not like a cheap, tacky, plasticky feel at all. Just the opposite. And even silly things like the leather trim on the gear paddles themselves is unmarked in a 127,000 mile car. Much like the steering wheel, you know, it all feels new, and it feels, more importantly, good. It's been well engineered, in my opinion. I really like the gauges and dials on the dash. The rev counter goes anti-clockwise up to 8,000 RPM, although in fact the engine only revs to 6,700 before it hits the soft rev limiter. The speedo goes right up to 220 miles an hour, which is obviously a fair bit quicker than the 187 the car will do. But I really like the way that when you're doing 70 miles an hour on the motorway, you're only a third of the way round the speedo, so the gauge is still kind of at the bottom, or the needle's still at the bottom. I really quite like that. Maybe I'm a bit of a child, but it makes it feel like you're driving a bit of a spaceship. The biggest thing you notice about the DB9 though is just the sense of calm. The linear throttle, the quietness, the comfortable driving position, the nice suspension. It just feels like you're kind of gliding along. It's not a Mercedes S-Class, you know, it's a little bit more agricultural than that, but then every other car in the world is. It just feels nice. It's a calm, relaxing place to be. Even when you're driving quite quickly, everything just feels right, and you're just a bit happier when you're driving this car than when you're driving something else. Aston Martin really know what they're doing. Things I don't like about the DB9, the brakes I've talked about already. They are a bit under-servoed at low speeds, but I forgive the car for that. What I struggle with is every time I look into this rear view mirror, it's just the cheapest, nastiest thing out of the Ford Fiesta parts bin from 1982 you can imagine. It just doesn't go with the car at all. Having said that, it's not too annoying if you just use the mirrors on the side and just forget it's there. That's the best strategy with that one. The sat-nav is well known to be completely useless. So what you want to do is put it away, which I'll show you how to do because it's not immediately obvious. You have to press this little joystick and go down to shut down, and it closes down like an old Windows PC. But the problem then is that at certain times of day, you get the sunlight reflecting directly into your eyes, and even with sunglasses, it's kind of difficult to see where you're going. So I think that's something that Aston perhaps didn't think through. I'm sure you could find a solution, maybe find like a dull matte black mat to put. In fact, as I'm saying this, the sun's shining directly into my eyes. I'll see if our cameraman James can get it for you. But I'm being picky. It's very clear that Aston have focused on what's important. The engine's an absolute peach. The chassis lovely. The brakes work really well. And everything that you really care about as a petrol head on this car is pretty much spot on, with a few bits and pieces that you'd really rather weren't here bolted on as an afterthought. But because the car's generally so good, you let it go. It's a bit like when your wife puts OXO instead of Bisto on your Sunday roast. But the beef was tender, the roast potatoes were really crispy and fluffy, so you let her off. Another thing that I don't really like about the DB9, or more accurately, I don't really get, is why on earth does it have 4 seats? I tried getting in the back the other day just for a joke, and I'm a renowned midget, as I think I've mentioned before, and my head was at pretty much a right angle. The space surely would have been better used to add boot space, for example, or just have a luggage shelf or something like that. As Dan, who runs the race team I drive for, pointed out the other day, it's really only good for very small children who need a baby seat anyway, so probably still wouldn't fit, or double amputee midgets. Another thing that's probably worth mentioning is that when you open the door on the DB9, it doesn't just open outwards, it simultaneously goes slightly up. This sounds great in principle, but in practice, when the car gets to be 15, 20 years old, the check straps in the door start failing a bit, and essentially it just won't stay open. So I'll show you what I mean now. When you open the Aston's door fully and then just let go, it slams closed. I'm sure it worked really well when the car was new, but it's kind of annoying, as I think you'll probably agree. But being a DB9, like with its other tiny flaws, we're going to lay it off. So to answer the question, is the DB9 an incredible bargain or a big mistake? I don't think you're going to be too surprised to hear that I think it's the bargain of the century. So should you buy one? Well, based on everything I've just said and its small faults put to one side, if you love cars, I think you should. And it's got the added benefit that everyone you come into contact with seems to agree. One thing I forgot to say earlier, I was driving this car the other day and I had my friend in the car and I was just showing him what the car could do and you know what the engine sounds like when you rev it up to the rev limiter, and there was an undercover police car. We were behind it and he put his lights on when he was still in front of us, and all he did was wound the window down and said, "Slow down." And I thought that guy could have definitely waited for us to go in front of him and then followed us and done whatever it is these people do. So even the police like this car, and if it's good enough for the police, it's good enough for me. Thank you, officer. So cameraman James just suggested that I mention you can't fit golf bats in the boot. Why he would know this is beyond me. I don't really know. I don't know whether you can fit golf bats in there or not, but according to him, you can't. So there you go. He then had the audacity to say that this is a golfer's car, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. So for the Adam Drive score out of 10, we're going to rate the car on fun, comfort, handling, and most crucially of all, how it makes you feel. So starting with fun. Well, this is a fun car. I've driven it now on both a racetrack and on the road, and I've got to say, it scores well. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Coming on to comfort, the car is very comfortable. I feel like you want to be, it suits a taller driver and a shorter passenger. And the reason I say that, I've had two mates, one of which is cameraman James, who are both quite tall, and they've both said they're quite uncomfortable in the passenger seat. I think the reason is because the floor is slightly raised on the passenger side. I don't actually know the reason, but I would imagine it's probably got ECUs under the carpet there or something like that. On the driver's side, the floor's not raised, and I actually feel a little bit too short for the car in an ideal world. So I'm a little close to the steering wheel. I could do with being further back, but then if I was, I wouldn't be able to reach the pedals. So on that basis, I'm going to say a 7.5, I'm going to say, for comfort. Coming on to handling, I mentioned earlier how most cars that have got V12 engines in the front generally don't handle that well. This really is the exception to the rule with that. Handling is actually really nice, both on the circuit and on the road. So I'm going to say for handling, 9 out of 10. But most importantly of all, how does the Aston Martin DB9 make you feel? Well, apart from the rubbish sat-nav out of the Volvo parts bin, the rubbish interior mirror out of the Ford parts bin, and one or two minor other things, it really does feel like a special car, from the gauges to the steering wheel to the seats to the woods that I quite like in the middle but other people don't seem to like. It just feels like a special car. It's a nice place to be, and it feels like a special place to be. So on that basis, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. It would be 9.5 if it didn't have those other minor issues. Anyway, that gives a total of 8.5. James did the maths. That was the Adam Drives review for the beautiful and amazing Aston Martin DB9. We paid £14,500 for this car, which I think makes it one of the bargains of the year. It's been a long day filming. We started early and it's getting late now, so I'm thinking that means gin and tonic time. What do you reckon, James?
Or two.
Or three. Right, we're off to the pub. See you later.